Good afternoon, and welcome to our second reading of our chapter read aloud, Hello Universe, by Erin Entrada Kelly. And this book won the Newbery Award. And if you remember, we pretty much got introduced to most of the major characters. There's Virgil Sanchez, Valencia Somerset, and Kaori Tanaka, and then the bully, Chet Bullens. We really haven't gotten any of them together yet, and actually what I'm going to do today is I'm going to skip a little bit ahead and read a couple of chapters of what happens a little bit later on. I don't think this will spoil the book for you at all, and it may make you want to pick it up and read it. So we're going to skip ahead a little bit to chapter 16, and this chapter is entitled Down, Down, Down. Of all the treats in the entire world, celery sticks, baby carrots, orange slices, Gulliver liked dandelions best. And if you remember, Gulliver is a guinea pig. It took him less than 5 seconds to eat an entire stem, and then he'd root around for more. For Gulliver, dandelions were a rare delicacy. For humans, they were noxious weeds that needed to stop growing. But grow they did. Dandelions were everywhere in Virgil's neighborhood. They sprouted from the cracks in the sidewalk, leaned against rusty fence posts, sneaked into well-manicured lawns. Virgil plucked them habitually, like an explorer searching for gems. By the time he reached the woods, his left pocket was stuffed with them. He could have stuffed the other pocket too, but he was saving that for stones. He wasn't allowed to explore the woods alone. The trees were thick in some places and sparse in others. Flowers grew intermittently, a patch of iris here, a colony of dandelions there. Lola was convinced the woods teemed with snakes, but Virgil was certain that he could find 5 stones here. And not just any stones, but the best stones in his town had to offer. He found 2 right away, just a few feet into the woods. Deeper in, the sounds of the neighborhood faded away, and he found another, just like that. He was so focused on looking down, surveying the ground with his eyes, that he barely noticed the ominous rustling sound behind him. But when he heard the shuffle of feet, he jerked around, heart pounding, and stood very still. If there was one thing he knew, it was that you had to stay still when faced with forest beasts. Otherwise, you could become their supper. He didn't see anything, but he was certain he had heard something, and it wasn't the blowing of the wind or the falling of a twig. Someone or something was moving nearby. Hello? Virgil said quietly, like a croak. He thought he heard something. A growl? A snort? He suddenly got the idea that there was a rhinoceros on the other side of the trees, clawing its front hoof in the dirt, bowing its head, steadying its horn, ready to charge. He imagined himself being flung into the air and landing on the thick gray skin of the giant creature before being trampled. One of Lola's old ghost stories popped into his head, too. She said there was once a man who had told all his secrets to the trees, and after he died, the trees whispered them to anyone who passed by. Maybe it wasn't a rhinoceros, but a bunch of old trees that were ready to tell the secrets of the dead. Virgil looked at his phone. It was 10:15. Maybe he'd just snatch up the next stones he saw and rush to Kaori's house. She might not mind if he got there early. But then the shuffling sound receded and disappeared, and the woods were quiet again. Virgil exhaled. His heart slowed. He looked at his feet, saw a 4th stone, and put it in his pocket. He wondered if he'd picked the best ones. He wondered so deeply that he didn't hear the other shuffling sound, this time approaching from behind. Hey, retardo! Virgil turned around, startled. Chet Bones' meaty face was a light shade of red, like it was ready to burst. What are you doing out here all by yourself? Lost your mommy? It occurred to Virgil that the bull was also out here by himself, but he wasn't about to point that out. Instead, Virgil said nothing. He stood there, one pocket full of stones and the other full of dandelions, feeling very dumb, like someone who he had lifted him out of one story and placed him in another, in these unfamiliar woods, in this unfamiliar situation, alone with the bull, who was carrying a pillowcase. Virgil wondered what the pillowcase was for, and in the space of 3 seconds, he had thought of a handful of terrifying scenarios. The bull would smother him with it. He was using it to carry the bodies of dead animals. He was going to capture animals, smother them, then carry their dead bodies. And Chet wasn't just carrying a pillowcase. He was also wearing a Chicago Bulls t-shirt. Beware the color red. Suddenly the rhinoceros didn't seem so bad. What's the matter? The bull said, Oh yeah, I forgot. You don't know how to talk. You're a retard. I see you going into that retard class all the time. What goes on in there anyways? Bunch of kids wetting their pants, I bet. In addition to being afraid of the dark, carrying a guinea pig in his backpack and stuffing his pockets full of dandelions and rocks, Virgil had another secret. He weighed only 76 pounds, and even though he pretended to be 5 feet tall, he was actually 4'11". Virgil wasn't sure how much the bull weighed or how tall he was, but he certainly weighed more than 76 pounds. "You really are stupid, huh?" the bull said. His eyes shifted to Virgil's backpack. Chet took a step forward and Virgil took a step back, which Bull thought was hilarious because he immediately broke into peals of laughter before ripping Virgil's backpack off his shoulders with such force that Virgil actually spun, and hit the ground with a numbing whack that shot from the palms of his hands to his shoulders. The bull took off like a bullet. Virgil pulled himself up and ran after him, saying, "No, no, no," in the loudest voice he could manage without choking. "Gulliver, Gulliver," he cried. Or maybe he only said it in his head. He wasn't sure. The bull darted between the trees, not laughing anymore, just running with Virgil's backpack in his hands. A million horrifying images blazed through Virgil's mind. The bull tearing Gulliver in two, feeding him into a pit of lions, picking him up and tossing him into the trees, which is why he didn't feel any better when the bull finally stopped running and turned to face him, his cheeks flushed and his hair and neckline glistening. Virgil waited for him to open the backpack, discover Gulliver, and destroy him. Instead, the bull took a giant step back, grinned evilly, and turned toward a stumpy circle of stones that Virgil had never even noticed. It was an old well. With two hefty shoves, the bull pushed the cover of the well aside and dangled the backpack over the now open hole. "Say goodbye to your stuff, Retardo," he said. The bull let go, and the bag fell into the dark, gaping well, so far down that Virgil didn't even hear it land. "Guess you'll have to get new books, pansy boy," the bull said, his smile widening. "Not that you need them anyway, since you probably don't know how to read." The bull wiped his hands on the front of his jeans as if he finished a dirty, dirty deed, which he had, and then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the woods and leaving Virgil alone. Chapter 17, Going Underground. There are more than 7,000 islands in the Philippines. Some don't even have people living on them. And then there are some that once had people but don't anymore, like the lowland island of Balatama. Lola had told Virgil about it. According to Lola, Balatama was once a thriving desert island in the south. It thrived so much that the people kept taking land that belonged to the mountain creatures. One day, the people cut down a gathering of trees that belonged to a majestic bird named Pa. Pa had the wingspan of an elephant and talons as sharp as knives. When his trees were cut down, he was so angry that he grew bigger and bigger. When he spread his wings, they were so large and dark that they blotted out the sunlight. This made Pa happy because the darkness blinded the villagers. They would get lost and wander in circles, and then Pa would swoop down, pluck them up, and eat them. Pa controlled the darkness and used it as a weapon. He knew that darkness turned people weak because it confused them and made them wander. But darkness created easy victims because no one could fight an enemy they could not see. Pa's talons would sever the villagers in half before they even realized they were in trouble. Virgil was 8 years old the first time he heard the story of Pa. Now, as he leaned over the side of the well, he half expected Pa's talons to come shooting out of it. Even though it was a bright sunny afternoon above ground, the deep well that now cradled Gulliver was a dark, dark place. And darkness was darkness, whether it was in the sky or not. Virgil's heart thundered in his ears. A tight knot collected in his chest and rose, till it pushed its way to his eyes, which pooled with tears. "Gulliver," he said. An inky blackness gaped up at him like the throat of a hungry beast. It smelled musty and dank and deathly. But Gulliver was down there. He couldn't leave Gulliver, not for a second. There was hope, though, a ladder. He had no choice. He emptied his pocket of stones and set them carefully on the rim of the well. Then he started his journey down. The descent was unsteady. Virgil's foot hesitated before every rung, but ultimately landed, quivering where it belonged. With each step, he gripped the ladder tighter and tighter until his knuckles ached. Down, down, down. Was the bottom of the well full of water? Was Gulliver drowning, struggling to breathe? So deep and black was the well that Virgil couldn't see anything, not even when he was 6 rungs down, and for a moment he thought maybe he'd descended for nothing. Maybe the bull hadn't thrown Gulliver inside after all, and he just imagined the whole thing. But then, after what seemed like forever, there it was, not floating in water, but slouched on its side at the bottom of the well, zipper still open just an inch, just enough for Gulliver to breathe. The darkness had invaded Virgil's lungs and choked him, and he couldn't breathe until he knew Gulliver was breathing too. He listened for him, chuttering, chirping, anything, but all he heard was the drumming of his own heart. Virgil was still a fair distance from the bottom when he lowered his foot and discovered there was no longer a rung to step onto. He clutched the rusty bars and craned his neck to look down, slowly, slowly, so as not to lose his balance, and realized he'd reached the end of the ladder, but he needed 2 more rungs at least. The backpack wasn't within reach, not even close, and his legs weren't long enough to touch the ground. Virgil could see the backpack. He couldn't tell if there was any movement inside, but he certainly couldn't climb up and give up. Not without Gulliver. The thought of abandoning Gulliver was far worse than the realization that he'd have to jump. He pulled himself closer to the ladder, hugging it almost chest to iron, as if the mere thought of jumping would send him falling to his death. And now he heard his own breathing. It broke through the silence in quick, rapid spurts like the hiccups. All at once he began to sweat. A faucet inside of him turned on and everything dampened. The insides of his elbows, the palms of his hands, the space between each of his perfectly shaped fingers, the back of his neck, each hair-lined follicle of his forehead, his size 5 feet, the space between his shoulder blades, everything. If this was how a body prepared to jump, he thought, it wasn't very useful. He lowered his right foot and pressed the toe of his sneaker against the well, and then brought his right hand down to the next iron bar. He stayed like that for several moments, unsure what to do, looking like 2 halves of one boy, one climbing down, the other going up. He didn't lower his left hand until his legs started to ache, and he didn't move his other foot until he absolutely had to. When he did, he was hanging from the third to last rung like they were monkey bars, which he'd never been able to cross in his entire life. He went down to the next bar and pointed his toe to see if he felt the ground yet. Nothing. He lowered himself again. And now he dangled from the ladder with nowhere else to go but down. He had to let go, but he couldn't. A dozen images fired through his brain. He saw himself clutching a broken arm and wailing in pain. He saw twisted ankles with the bones sticking out, a head injury that left him motionless until he finally evaporated into a skeleton, a bloody gash above his eyebrow as he slammed against the well's rugged walls. All these seemed like likely scenarios, what with the distance to the bottom. But there was Gulliver. Gulliver, said Virgil. He expected his voice to echo, but he didn't. He looked up. The mouth of the well was a perfect circle above him. There was daylight there, and air. There were trees and birds and Lola. The well smelled like an old sock. The world smelled like trees and grass. He looked up at the light. He looked down at Gulliver. He let go. There are many terrible things that can happen to a boy who jumps into a well. He could break his head open, suffer a broken arm, twist his ankles, bones sticking out, all that. Or his cell phone could fall out of his pocket and shatter into 1,000,000 pieces. Virgil's phone and his feet hit about half a second apart. As soon as he felt the ground under his sneakers and the numb tingling of pain from impact, he realized 2 things. He had landed safely, and his phone had not. But the first thing he did was to grab his backpack and zip it open. He reached in to feel Gulliver and heard a single healthy chirp. Gulliver was none the wiser. He just wanted a dandelion, so Virgil gave him one. You're okay, Virgil said, even though Gulliver already knew this. Virgil's heart had been a steady drumbeat in his ears, but it quelled now. He rested the backpack against the wall and reached for his phone. It had broken into 3 pieces, screen, battery, and everything else. Virgil put the pieces back together, because you don't give up without trying, Lola always said. All the king's horses and all the king's men, said Virgil, snapping the battery in place. It fit fine, but he could already see that there was no hope for the screen. There was a crack in the corner that branched out like a spider web. Couldn't put Humpty together again. He tried to turn it on, but nothing happened. He tried again. He shook it. He took it apart again and put it back again, kept his thumb on the power button until it hurt. Nothing. He put the phone in his pocket anyway. Then he tipped his head back and looked up, up, up. The light was there, but it was far away, like a cloud he couldn't touch. He stood under the ladder. He reached toward the bottom rung, but his fingertips were nowhere near it. He got on his tiptoes so high that it hurt, but he still couldn't reach. He bent his knees and jumped with all his might, arms outstretched, and that didn't do any good either. If I were Joselito or Julius, I would have no trouble reaching the ladder, he thought. But then again, if I were Joselito or Julio, I probably wouldn't be down here in the first place. He jumped again. He looked toward the light. Hello? He said, hesitant at first. Hello? Then louder. Hello? 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 He knew it wouldn't do any good. No one was ever out in the woods, and even if they were, they probably couldn't hear him. Chapter 18. Animal. Chet was now convinced that Davies had lied about the snakeskin. He hadn't found the first bit of evidence that there were any snakes in the woods. That must be what he was doing with the pillowcase. Then again, he wasn't exactly sure what kind of evidence snakes left behind besides snakeskin, but nonetheless, he hadn't found any. He'd even broken off a branch so he could root around. He used the branch to push aside clusters of fallen twigs and small bunches of leaves to see if a snake was hiding underneath, fangs at the ready. But then he wasn't scared either, because he was no chicken. The noises in the wood were fairly standard, the occasional tweet of some stupid bird, the faraway sound of a car driving down a road in the neighborhood, the sound of Chet's sneakers hitting the ground. But during a particularly detailed search at the base of an ash tree, while Chet diligently poked at the ground with his branch, he heard something different. It sounded like someone moving stealthily through the trees. Someone or something. He half expected to come face to face with a grizzly bear, but then he realized how ridiculous that was. He reminded himself that he was no chicken, even though his heart was pounding. When he didn't see anything, he stood up straighter and turned all the way around to give the area a proper survey. He listened. He heard it again, now from another direction, a shifting movement. He shifted too, quickly, so quickly that he made a lot of noise. Shh, he said to himself. He raised the branch to prepare to use it as a weapon. Who's there? He said, but his voice was so quiet and whispery that he wasn't sure anyone could have heard him. And then he dawned on him it was probably that idiot boy with the backpack, the skinny kid who never talked, the Chinese or whatever he was kid. He was probably trying to make his way back home and wanted to stay out of sight, which made perfect sense, all things considered. Let's face it, that kid was no match for Chet Bullens. Chet's confidence returned. It bloomed through his body until his shoulders relaxed and his chest puffed out. Hey, Dumbo, he said. Is that you, sneaking off to the bookstore? Chet laughed as if this was the funniest thing he'd said all day. He often thought he would make a good comedian, what with all his funny jokes. Chet waited. His eyes moved slowly from tree to tree. The thought of someone being so afraid that he had to sneak by made Chet feel like a warlord or a warrior. Sometimes before he went to bed at night, he even imagined himself that way, like it was the Middle Ages, and he himself was an all-powerful knight, sitting on top of a mighty horse covered in armor and pointing at people with his fine-tipped sword. Go fetch me water, you peasant, he'd say, his imaginings. But there was no peasants here, so he was stuck with names like Dumbo. It would still work better if the kid had bigger ears, but it still worked. You can run, but you can't hide, yelled Chet. He wasn't very original, but it was all he could come up with on short notice. There was another rustle, but no boy. Chet turned the other way around and thought he heard something, but this time from an opposite direction, so he pivoted full circle, and that's when he saw her. Valencia Somerset. Chet dropped the branch and moved closer to the tree. He told himself they wanted to spy on her, but really he was hiding. The way she glared at him at the Super Saver gave him the creeps, and now here she was in the woods holding something, a bowl. She hadn't seen him, that was clear. She was focused on something else. Her eyes were narrow with concentration, like she was picking apart each leaf. She walked slowly, carefully, like she didn't want to disturb anything, and all the while she held the bowl with both hands. It was obvious she was looking for an animal. Or maybe not an animal, maybe a creature. Chet moved further behind the tree so she wouldn't see him. What if she was out here doing some kind of sacrifice? He remembered the blazing, angry look in her eyes. Something wasn't quite right in that girl's head, and it wasn't just her ears. She crouched, peering through the trees, then stood and peered some more. What was in the bowl? Maybe it was a human finger. Or 12 chicken feet? Perhaps she cut the ears off of rabbits, and she wanted to feed them to some secret Bigfoot-like beast that lived in the forest. She was evil, clearly. There was something strange about a girl who couldn't hear. Unless she was lying about that. Chet mustered up the courage to make a noise that sounded like it could be an animal. He clucked his tongue. He hooted like an owl, quietly at first, then louder. Valencia didn't react. He hooted again, louder still, but she just kept walking deliberately with her bowl. A few logical explanations crossed Chet's mind. Maybe she was taking care of stray cats. Only hadn't seen a single one out here. There were only squirrels. And who would bring a bowl into the woods to feed squirrels? Clearly she was up to no good. And I'll stop there, and I hope you enjoyed this reading. And again, I hope you'll check it out. It's called Hello Universe by Erin Entrada Kelly. Hope you'll find out how or if Virgil gets out of the well. Goodbye. See you next week.